Scanlon. He is an associate teaching professor in the Department of Statistics and Data Science. And he also leads the TeachStat group, which is a group that works in research in education, statistics education, and they have a collaboration with the English language department, which is also related to what he's gonna talk about today. So, without any further ado, I'll let you take it.
All right, thank you. Glad to be here today. So as Emmanuel mentioned, I'm going to talk about some of the work we've been doing with our English department at CMU, studying some work in sort of a combination of statistics education and, of course, the topic of the day, large language models that everyone's interested in. Particularly what I'm interested in is the use of writing in our own courses as a way of teaching students about statistics and developing their skills that they might need to use being statisticians. And so, they always say start your slides with the main takeaways for the day. So, the question that I'd like to address is the role of writing in the statistics curriculum now that we have large language models that model writing. And the key takeaway is, I don't know. But there are useful things we can do, particularly studying how students and experts and large language models write to better understand what happens when a student uses an LLM to write like an expert. And we'll see that, in fact, it does not look like an expert. Student writing, in fact, increasingly looks like LLM writing, which is coincidentally, there's aspects that match expert writing. But this may end up denying students the practice they need in order to write more like experts. But to get through all of that, we can ask, what is writing for in like the statistics and data science curriculum when you're teaching courses? Now, there's several answers to this question. Of course, the correct answer is to inflate weak ideas, obscure poor reasoning, and inhibit clarity. Bill Watterson always being, incisive as ever. But you're not allowed to say this one. So we can think of there being a spectrum of purposes from one end to the other. On one end, there's what's called writing to learn in like the English writing community, which is the idea of if I give you this writing assignment, the purpose of the assignment is to help you learn the concepts of the class. So, I make you write a data analysis report because that forces you to organize your ideas and make an argument. Maybe doing that will help you learn about regression and testing and whatever the topics are. And that also helps by, for instance, helping the instructor see what you're thinking. So the instructor can tell you, no, you've made a mistake there and help you learn. And gives you opportunities to give students feedback. And assignments like this do not have to be authentic in the sense of like looking like what you would do on the job. The purpose is just to make you think and write, and doing that helps you learn whatever it is. So there are lots of examples of things like, for instance, exit tickets are a popular strategy. You go to class, to leave the class, you write on a note card like, what's the question you have about class today? Or something you learned, or some like little question the instructor poses at the end of class. Those are all collected as you leave. That helps you, helps the instructor, helps you figure out what your questions are, engages you in the class, whatever it is. And there's lots of things like this. And of course, for these kinds of tasks, you can say, okay, if I just let the large language model do it, what's the function of that activity now? If the goal was to make you organize your thoughts and think about the subject, now what does it do? At the other end of the spectrum is the idea that's called writing in the disciplines, or sometimes writing the curriculum, which is the idea that writing is a professional skill. You will graduate and go get jobs where you do writing. You're writing papers or making reports for management or making presentations for clients or whatever it'll be, sending important emails. And so we should practice that skill because it's a skill you will need. It's the professional preparation. And so you make authentic assignments. You write assignments for the class that look like the thing you'd actually have to do so you can practice those skills. And so you write assignments like this one where I posed there's a particular client, this billionaire who wants to be immortal, and they have a data set and they have some research questions. And you do a data analysis, you answer the questions, you write a report for the client. It's meant to be very authentic. And very realistic question for a billionaire today, so you try to make it match as close as possible. And with these kinds of assignments, you could say, well, maybe the LLM is like a calculator, it's a tool to help them do the task. So then the question you have to ask is, will they, in fact, if they use this tool, will they produce something that looks like a professional would do doing this assignment? Or do they do something else? And so is this being used to achieve the goal or not? Now, you can immediately start pontificating about this, but it's helpful to consider what we already know about how students learn to write, like in a college setting. It's already pretty well known in English writing research that there's a style shift in student writing as they they start as novices and progress through the courses to graduation. So students tend to start with what's called an involved or interactional style. This is a style that has lots of pronouns. They're talking about what I think and what you can see in the plot and so on. And there's a lot of private verbs, which is a term for things like what you think or what you feel or what your own thoughts and intentions. Lots of contractions because it's more informal. It's sort of a more disjointed writing style that's more like how you talk. And so students come in and they sort of write how they talk. They write in that style. But as you move towards graduation and becoming, an academic or whatever, you get a more informational style. And so there's things like big noun structures. So this, in italics, a parameterized covariance structure, we estimated, is one noun. I mean, there's structure at the root there, and everything else is just modifying structure to say what kind of structure it is. Academics love doing that, just stapling adverbs and adjectives and clauses onto nouns to make a very specific thing because we're trying to be precise. You get lots of nominalizations, which is when you take something that's not a noun and you make it a noun by sticking, like, you take judge and turn it into judgment. Now it's a noun. It's sort of an informationally dense style rather than the speaking, which can be very not dense, lots of filler. And it takes students quite a while to progress towards this writing style. But also, writing isn't one thing. There's lots of kinds of writing you might do in college or wherever, from business memos to data analysis reports to presentations for clients to emails to informal text to your buddies, etc. And they all look different. There's a common problem you see if a student comes in to the first statistics course where they have to write a data analysis report, and they were like really great at writing essays in English literature in high school, and they try to write it like that, and it doesn't work. It doesn't look like a data analysis report because there's unique features to each of them. When you're doing English literature, you don't have to know how to talk about figures and tables. And so then you come in and you write a data analysis report, and you don't know how to do that. There's lots of simple things that are essential for producing professional-looking writing. But of course, we're increasingly using LLMs to help us do all of these things. And we don't have to speculate that much on like writing skill development and the effect of practice and doing things in courses, because this has already been studied by, again, the English literature and English writing community. So for instance, you can think of writing development in students in sort of three phases. You start off in this knowledge telling phase that's like 6-year-olds. They just say whatever they know. And they don't really think about what you know and the communication. They're just saying stuff that they know. And it takes a while to develop that. You end up then in the next stage, which is knowledge transforming, they call it, which is when people will say, I need to write to figure out what I think. It's that thing where you write it down, you look at it, and you go, I didn't realize that was my point. I should rearrange this. And the active writing helps you with your own thinking. And the third stage, the last one that typically comes with expertise and practice, is keeping in mind your audience, what they know, and then realizing, wait, they won't interpret what I'm saying correctly. I should say it a different way, while also keeping track of all of the other pieces of writing. And so you end up needing a lot of things in working memory at the same time. You end up needing to keep track of your own ideas and what you want to say, the grammatical mechanics of how to structure sentences and paragraphs, and the hypothetical reader and what they're thinking and what they've seen so far and what you told them already So you can keep track of like if they're going to be confused. And doing all of those things at once is hard. And it's like any expert skill, like driving. The first time you learn to drive, like maintaining speed and staying on the road at the same time are hard. And you keep being like, oh, I'm going off the road. Oh, wait, I'm too fast. And you keep like oscillating back and forth. And then you practice it a little while and it's not hard at all. And uh, same thing happens here in writing, where doing deliberate practice of writing, spending time writing more, makes it easy. Eventually the grammatical mechanics are easy. You don't really have to think about them, so you can start thinking about what the audience is thinking. And so it takes some practice to do that, just like driving or sports or any other expert skill you might develop. So the question then is, if we start outsourcing these tasks, what happens to that skill development and our ability to produce expert quality writing? And so I'm going to start coming at this from a few different angles. The first of them is just investigating how large language models write and what they do. How does that compare to that like novice to expert spectrum? Uh, and I'll do this by talking about what we call the Human AI Parallel English Corpus, or HAPI. And the HAPI corpus is designed to let us do direct comparison of writing styles between humans and AI across genres. So David Brown in our English department compiled 12,000 human-written texts, academic papers, news articles, fiction, podcast transcriptions, blog posts, TV and movie scripts, a whole set of things, 2,000 from each of those categories, and 1,000 words from each, so that we have a nice piece. And what we did is we used these to generate output from several large language models. We've gone through 2 different versions of ChatGPT now, as well as open models from both Meta and Google, ones that they release that you can run on your own. And we've run these through. And the way we do it is we take the human text and we split it into 2 chunks. So, roughly the first 500 words, the next 500 words. And you take the first chunk and you turn it into a prompt for the large language model. And you say, in the same style, tone, and diction, write the next 500 words of this. And you give it the 500 words, so it sees what it's about, it sees the style, it can hopefully try to imitate it. It has enough context to know. And then you get the result from these models, and now actually more models that we've run it through, out of those models, and you can directly compare it to the actual next 500 words to see what's different. Now, the question then is, what do you look for? And so I will pose you a puzzle. Here we have 2 texts from this corpus, one of which is AI generated and one of which is written by a human. And the question is, can you tell which is which? And if you can, what did you look at? So let me give you a minute just to read these and see what you're looking for. So you can see these are both, biographical blurbs for someone. So let me ask, how many of you think A is AI generated? Okay, a big chunk. How many about think B is AI generated? Ah, okay. 3 versus everyone. So for those of you who picked A, what's something you saw in here that you think makes it look AI generated?
It's like a trope that like AI writing is like it's not just blank, it's blank.
Ah,
Here you kind of have this
should not only be a set of rules, but something, that kind of thing. So there's like a pattern that you recognized.
Not what you see, but what you don't see, which is hard facts. There's no dates, there's no specifics.
Ah.
They
Whereas this one has, they
specific-
became a professor, they did, yeah. So how about, yeah, uh-huh, uh-huh. And this in particular, like this is a past participle uh, here. And do we have another one in here? I mean, we have actually, steeped in, there's another participle happening. So how about for B? Anyone want to volunteer why they picked B?
Like the purpose of the writing. Like I would choose B for some purposes, and I would choose A for others.
Okay.
What all you said was in the style of these first 500 words.
Yeah, I didn't say this is a biography for to go on this publication or whatever.
Well, and I guess, so building on that comment, so I could think that A was written by a student, whereas I would think that B was probably written by an expert. So you have the short
Mhm.
sentences that are typical to English as opposed to other languages, where you kind of have this boom, boom, boom kind of structure. So that's how you're taught to write.
Well, it depends who taught you, but yes.
But that's how I was taught to write.
Yeah. So the spoiler, this is the AI generated one. And I mentioned participles. So you're pointing out the structural features. We'll come back to this, but past participles, this is GPT-4o. GPT-4o loves participles. So we'll come back to this. I can quantify this. But you can see there are structural features. It's not just the vocabulary or something. People were pointing out there's the way the sentences are structured, how long they are, and the clauses and things, as well as the tone, like fact-based, not so fact-based. There are features that you kind of learn to recognize. So what we did to be able to do this, it turns out, yes. Ah, do you mean like then? So if you ask it, was this written? So I don't know. That would be interesting to try because we'll come back to what we found is there's a systematic shift. Like even if you try to get it to write a particular way, it favors certain features. I don't know. It may be the case that if you explain to it what those features are, it would be able to recognize participles and the other features and maybe give you a guess. But then so can we once we have some practice. But it does not, like if in general you just ask if was this written by you, it's not particularly good at that, I don't think. So what we did is we took a set of linguistic features already used in corpus linguistics for register variation, which is like what's the difference between spoken English and formal English and informal English. So there's some things like counting different parts of the speech, but also things like counting how many nominalizations there are. I mentioned that's popular in formal writing, so things like justification or abandonment. Counting past and present participles, which we just saw. Lots of structural features that you learned about in high school English class and then forgot. The different like grammatical clause types and different kinds of conjunctions and so on. Also some rhetorical things like hedging. So when you say this might be or this could be and you're hedging your claim, there's a set of common patterns for that that are counted, or amplifiers or downtoners. This is amplifying your claim. So we count all of those, we count contractions, and in total 67 different things. And what you can do, I mean, these have already been widely studied, but what you can do is compare them to human usage. So here, these are sort of the top 15 features that best distinguish human and AI writing. And what we've done is we've scaled them all. So the vertical line here is the rate that the AI, like GPT-4o here, uses it is the same as humans. To the right means it uses it more, and to the left means it uses it less. And we see, for instance, GPT-4o uses present participial clauses at roughly 5 times the rate that humans do. So until they replaced it with GPT-5, I could just open a student writing and go, that's an awful lot of participles, and I was usually right. And we see things like using a that clause as the subject of a sentence, very popular thing. But let's see, nominalizations, twice as popular as among humans. But certain things are less common, adverbs. You'll also see it's not shown here, but contractions, they tend to avoid contractions. And there's 2 interesting things here. So these are paired. The top one is a larger version of the bottom one. When I first talked to a friend at Google DeepMind about this project, he said his intuition was the larger the language model, the better it should match humans, because larger is bigger and better. But you see GPT-4 mini and GPT-4 basically the same. And same with the larger llama and the smaller llama. You notice also like llama also likes participles, but not quite so much. The interesting thing is this column. So when you train a large language model, you may have heard the analogy that, it's just a Markov chain type thing predicting the next word, but with a huge model. That's not exactly true. That's what these are. This is just, you get a huge corpus of text and you train a neural network to predict the next token. And you see, they follow the line pretty well. But that would not be a very good ChatGPT, because if you ask it a question, it will continue your question. It's not a question answering thing, it's a text continuing thing. So what you have to do is instruction tune the model, which is a reinforcement learning and post-processing thing where you give examples of tasks and you adjust the model to perform like the examples. You have humans rate the output on different tasks. You give it a bunch of like summarization tasks and math problems, and you try to coerce the model into being good at these things. And that's when you go from the base model to the instruction tuned one, suddenly the participles start showing up and the other style features, suggesting, although the companies, you can download the model, but they will not tell you the training data or how they did the instruction tuning. That's the secret sauce. It suggests that the instruction tuning process is accidentally inducing style changes. That maybe, for instance, there's a lot of summarization tasks, and in summarizations you like informationally dense output. And so we tend to feature things like nominalizations and some information density related features. And maybe the human raters think participles are really cool. And so they go to get rated better. I mean, there's lots of possible explanations here. So here then I also have Google's open models. And we notice similar patterns happening here, but they're not quite the same. Each company seems to have their sort of house style. There are features that are common, like participles, although you notice GPT-5 has stomped on that really hard and gotten rid of the participles, which is, I'm sad now because that was my classifier. I actually once tried a sparse tree building, like globally optimal sparse decision tree algorithm, and it basically just made two nodes, just like how many participles are there, and then maybe nominalizations, and then that was it. So there's some variation, and each new model also tends to write differently. So here I'm comparing GPT-4o and GPT-5, and we see going from lots of participles to very few, big shifts everywhere. GPT-5 got rid of the emphatics, using them way less than GPT-4o did, and so on. Yeah.
Baseline, what humans actually write, is that like across formal and informal writing?
Yes, that's across our core within categories, and you can see shifts. Basically, where these LLMs match human writing the best is actually academic writing, but they still shift to be sort of even more academic, and everything else like TV and movie scripts slide over to start looking academic, which is, so I guess it's like if we all started trying to write TV shows.
Features.
So these features can be detected if you do part of speech tagging on the text. They're sort of pattern matching. You do part of speech tagging and dependency parsing, where dependency parsing means like this is the subject of this verb and this noun is the object of the verb. You can then define patterns for like passive voice, which is not on here anymore. You can look for sentence containing a particular verb tense and then look to see if it says, which tense it was and the position of the nouns and the subject and so on. You can detect passive voice. So that's how this was done, I think, in the 80s with like a Perl script, and we have an R package that does it. No, although we really want to. I'd like to try Claude. I'd like to try some of the other models. It's just a matter of throwing money at their APIs to run our corpus through. So other interesting things, of course, the vocabulary of use differs a lot. So what we have here is each point is a word. And on the x-axis is the human rate of usage of that word. And on the y-axis is the LLM rate. And you notice for the base model, They follow on the diagonal. It's wider for the less common words, higher variance, lower sample size, so fine. But much wider for the instruction-tuned ones. And if you look up in this off diagonal for instance, GPT-4o, you find, for instance, camaraderie, that it uses 162 times more often, or tapestry. And some of these overlap, interesting. So Llama 3 loves, for instance, palpable. That's like number 6 ChatGPT's list. Well, there's a sentence in the corpus where ChatGPT wrote the camaraderie is palpable. The metaphor, I don't know, it doesn't work, but some of these are artifacts. So like continuation, Llama like to say, oh, sure, the continuation of your text is, and then the next 500 words. So that was sort of an artifact. The base Llama 3 sometimes gets stuck and repeats the same word. So one of these here is just the word Deborah that it repeated 308 times in a row. So the base models sometimes aren't very good at producing nice grammatical text endlessly. Now, if you're wondering, this side of the diagonal is obscenity. They've gotten rid of that from the LLMs, much less obscenity. So, fill it in yourself. And we can also look at emotional content, which is interesting, because you may know, GPT being famous for being positive all the time and telling you that your ideas are great. Famous example of which being this one in response to someone asking about their business idea, which was selling poop on a stick. ChatGPT 4o at least loved to do that. Now, there's not a sycophancy detector that I found, but there is an emotions data set that you can use to train detectors for 27 different emotion categories. So not just like positive and negative sentiment, but they've categorized approval, admiration, anger, confusion, joy, bunch of things in a big corpus that you can then train a model on. So here, what I have is the density of neutral, just neutral sentences across the 6 genres. So you see, for instance, academic tends to be very neutral, not a lot of emotion, except GPT-4o shifted left, less neutral, because it's happy all the time. And you see that across genres that GPT-4o is shifted a little to the left. But then you notice GPT-5, which is just above it, very neutral. And same across like TV and movie scripts, GPT-5 is just all neutral all the time. So there's been, I think, a conscious effort at OpenAI to say, wait, our model is too happy all the time. Let's make it knock it off. And they kind of overdid it. It's actually too neutral now compared to the human text, and shifted to the right relative to these bottom 2 human chunks. And the match to genres, so here I have academic writing only. The match can be pretty bad. So x-axis is the human rate of that emotion, y-axis is the LLM rate. Here I have GPT-4o, lots of approval. That's the sycophancy thing. It's saying everything's great. So something like 30% of the sentences are approval. Whereas GPT-5 squashed way down, it's closer to the human line. And so they've clearly been trying to get rid of that. But this covers lots of things, and I was talking about statistics courses. So what about statistical writing? The kinds of things our students might do. So we tried a few things. 2 tasks that we did. One was we took intro data analysis reports in our first semester intro stats class. So they're just told, like, make some plots that answer this question. It's just exploratory data analysis. And we took 100 introductions that students wrote, and we asked GPT 3.5 at the time to write introductions for those topics. So we said, and we just did that 100 times, write an introduction for a report about this. The other one, which I did when GPT-4 was released with the ability to write and run code, you don't even need to download the code yourself, it'll just do it, is I had it do the regression assignment in my first semester PhD regression class. And for each of these, we did comparisons. So for the introductions, we compared not only to the students, but to published introductions in an academic writing corpus. For the data analysis report, we'll see I compared it to my own students. Yeah.
Did that your students, but do you know for a fact that they wrote all of the
We've been collecting intros since 2020, so we have some pre-ChatGPT ones, but we'll get to that question shortly. So here, what we did, we have the introductions from the three sources, LLMs, students, and experts. We calculated those 67 features I mentioned and did linear discriminant analysis. Lets you project down onto a two-dimensional plane. And this never happens when you do LDA, but you get just three very nice blobs so there's a dimension that's sort of the expert to novice dimension, published on the bottom, student on the top, and a dimension that's the human to LLM dimension. And to be honest, when my collaborator in English showed this to me the first time, I thought he had like made it up, but this is the data because this doesn't happen. So you tend to see the novice writing in these introductions more emphatics, more focus on people, more pronouns, more actions. The expert writing is more abstract, so more nouns, fewer people. Whereas ChatGPT, you tend to see longer words. That's a noticeable one consistently. More information density and fewer words used to modulate confidence, to either amplify a claim or hedge a claim, and so on. Now for the data analysis report, it was, writing the code was impressive. I had it, I gave it the data and I said, do the analysis of this. And it would, run the code, get an error, and immediately figure out how to fix it and write the new code. Did lots of things. Its data analysis report, like on the surface level, looks very well written. It looks very nice, although the analysis was not particularly inspired. And in fact, when I then read the analysis and then read the code, it would say like, based on the scatter plots, this relationship was linear, so we chose this model, and it never wrote code to make those scatter plots. So, hallucinated a few things. It does, automate plenty of human things, such as the bad habit of noting a non-significant result as marginally significant. It's learned from all of our public work. And I then assigned this in peer review. My PhD students write reports. I then do anonymous peer review, and I slipped this in and made everyone review it. And what happened last year when I did this is I came to class and I said, all right, let's talk about the reports now that you reviewed them. Let's look at this one. And they immediately said, was that ChatGPT? And part of the problem, A, there was the writing style, but B, they were like, this did all the things you told us not to do when we were talking about writing reports. So either it's AI or they weren't paying attention. When I did this again this year, they didn't guess it, but they were holding back on their peer reviews. They gave it sort of middling grades. And then when I told them, they were like, oh, that's good. We thought he was one of our classmates, so we weren't going to give it bad scores. Because the writing is good, but the presentation and the interpretation was not. It was just the classic, like, this beta was this number, and that means when you increase X by this many units, and then just repeating that for a bunch of things. Wasn't really getting at the questions. So what's the effect of all of this then? LLMs write differently. We tried it in statistics. They also write differently in statistics. So what happens with student writing? So since 2020, we've been collecting student writing in our courses in the statistics department. This was originally for a different purpose. Our English department is interested in how students learn to write over time and the progression. But we fortunately started collecting this before LLMs. And we have everything from first semester intro stats reports, second semester, like they're doing their first multiple regression and writing a simple report, all the way to our junior level course where they're doing a full regression analysis and logistic regression and writing full reports. And we have all of the text of those. And since our undergraduate program is large, this is over 2,500 reports that we have collected over 5 years now. So what we reasoned is if students are starting to use AI, maybe we can tell in our corpus. So what we did, well, actually 2 of our PhD students did, is they took AI-generated academic writing and pre-ChatGPT student writing, so like 2020, 2021, and did a simple linear discriminant analysis of just those 2. That gives you a linear combination of features that separates the academic AI writing and the student writing before there were LLM tools. You can then, with that linear combination, project every new report onto that same dimension and see where it lies. And you can ask, okay, what changes over time? So here we have the distribution of that score in 2021 and the distribution among ChatGPT generated academic writing from the Happy corpus. And year by year, there's a shift. Now, there's a couple interesting things about this shift. So each document in these ridge plots or each observation is one whole document. And you notice it's not becoming bimodal. There's not a little lump here and then another lump over there. It's not like these are the ones who just cheated on everything. It's shifting and the tail is stretching. So we started wondering, like, how are they using it if they are indeed slowly shifting in style that direction? And so we split up the reports by length. The first 20% of the reports are roughly the introduction, the next 20% when they're getting into the methods, all the way to the last 20%, which is probably the conclusion. And you notice before, so yellow is before AI and blue is after. And you notice even before AI, the introduction and conclusion are slightly different styles than the middle of the report, which makes sense. You're in the introduction and conclusion, you're trying to contextualize it, talk about the purpose and the goals. And in the middle, you're just saying, I fit this model and I made this plot and did this test and whatever. But the shifts are biggest in the introduction and conclusion, particularly the conclusion, suggesting that what students may be doing is being like, I don't know how to write a conclusion, and then getting a little help. Whereas in the method section, they're just like, well, I did a regression and then I made, and then they just, that's not as hard. And so they don't necessarily need as much help. We just got, like a week ago, the reports from this semester, from our second semester course, because so far this is just spring 2025. Problem is the models that are available have changed. So we're gonna have to figure out how to track this over time as the models students might be using change. But we expect to see more shifts, stylistic shifts over time. And we're looking at that. So what does this mean? So think back to those purposes. Writing to learn, where the writing helps you learn. Use your LLM to do your concept map or your exit ticket or whatever. What's the point? We may need to come up with additional activity types in classes to achieve those same goals. The goal of getting the student to think about the subject and the concepts and whatever. This is particularly acute, not just in writing, but in programming. We often do what I'd call coding to learn, or like we just taught you the bootstrap, or we just taught you Gibbs sampling or whatever. Now write the code to do a Gibbs sampler. And of course, when you go out and you actually do, you're just going to use Stan or whatever, like, it's fine. But the act of saying program this statistical method from scratch, the whole function is you have some vague idea in your head of what you were taught in class, probably doesn't match what the method is supposed to be. But if that translating into code forces you to reconcile your ideas and be like, wait, that didn't work. Why? The whole point is writing it as code makes you make the ideas concrete. So you may make people write the code for a bootstrap and they take their vague contradictory ideas and turn it into an actual implemented bootstrap. So you quickly reveal your misconceptions. Your idea didn't work, you can tell. But AI is very good at writing code. So what happens to these sort of coding to learn activities, just like the writing to learn activities, when I, write me a bootstrap and you just, it writes you a bootstrap? It defeats the purpose of the activity. And so we need something else that serves that same role. Unless we're giving up and saying you don't need to know how bootstrapping works because ChatGPT will do it for you. But then, why do you need a degree? On the other end of the spectrum, for writing in the disciplines, the idea of writing as a professional preparation, LLM writing does not look like expert writing. And I'm not entirely sure the AI companies fully see that. These linguistic tools that we've been applying are ones that are popular in the corpus linguistics world, but not in the sort of CS-oriented natural language processing. In fact, the whole premise of large language models is they fired all the linguists and just built a big model with a huge data set. So they don't have that sort of in-house expertise anymore. So I'm not sure they sort of see exactly the differences. They hear like, oh, it's sycophantic, but they're not, making these features that we pulled out and so on. So if we're worried about writing a particular way, writing how an expert would, how do we help students learn to write that way? It's not just, learn how to use ChatGPT to polish your introductions. There's got to be something else there. There may be opportunities in writing instruction to use LLMs for feedback and growth, have them use it to get feedback on their writing or help them make revisions, etc. But, you always can just ask ChatGPT to do that activity for you. So how do you make that a useful thing? And finally, becoming an expert in any discipline requires mastering the constituent skills so you can apply all of those skills automatically so that then you can focus on the expert skill of integrating it all and doing what you need, what you need to do. And perhaps you could say, AI can help you with some of that. I don't have to, master English grammar anymore because LLMs are really good. I mean, they're language models. They're good at that. So do I need to worry about like, oh, what's the difference between a participle and a positive? And well, probably not. But what about checking if the text says what you intend or how the audience of your writing will perceive it? The things that to be able to write fluidly, you have to be able to do sort of automatically. If you outsource the practice that helps you develop those skills, how do you become an expert? So how do you go from the level of I can get an LLM to do it to I can tell if what the LLM doing is what I want, and if it's good enough or if it did the wrong thing, misunderstood me? How do you become that expert without having the practice in the way? There may be a way to do that, but we don't yet know what that way is. So how do we do that? Even if we're going to let AI do all the work for us, we still need that ultimate integration and expertise step. So how do we get there? So, maybe an expert can use AI to become more productive, but the AI is not itself a substitute for an expert. So how do we get more experts? How do we do the skill development that our students need to become expert writers or statisticians, data analysts, whatever it is? That's where my answer is, I don't really know. This is what we're going to have to figure out how to do over the next so many years. So thank you all for coming. I will leave you with the references of all of our previous work. Happy to take, I suppose we have a little time.
Yeah, we have 5 minutes for questions.
All right.
I've heard claim that a lot of the reason that large language models kind of speak the way that they do is because they were trained on a lot of advertising data or advertising language rather. Have you looked at how maybe writing becomes more akin to other types of writing as it relates to use of LLMs?
So
like academic writing becoming more advertisery in a sense?
that's a good question. I don't have a good corpus of advertising data to see like, does it look like that? But the thing is, I've heard different versions of that claim that like, oh, it writes this way because they trained it on X. So for instance, one I've heard is actually the human rating and the instruction tuning part is often outsourced. And I've heard people say like, oh, it likes Delve because in this country they outsourced it to everyone likes Delve. And there wasn't any data behind that claim. So I'd like to test that one. But there's versions of that. I think the interesting thing is it can't just be the training data. Because we saw the base models, at least for Meta and Google, match humans much better. So it can't just be like the training data leans academic or advertising or whatever. There's something in the instruction tuning process. Maybe a lot of the tasks are, write me copy for my website. And so they're rating on its ability to do that. But there's something extra in the instruction tuning step that must be doing it.
For your data sets that you collected, for what the reasoning current on?
So for all the models but GPT-5, there was no reasoning yet. For GPT-5, yes, it was on. You can't really turn it off. That means it costs an order of magnitude more to run GPT-5 mini on this corpus. But yeah, so it did do thinking for a lot of the prompts. I haven't, because of the cost, I didn't run it on different settings yet. But I mean, we'd like to try that and try Claude and try lots of variations as well to see what happens there.
sounds like maybe you're saying we instead of trying to like, let's not use these at all, let's learn how to use them and also like consciously use them, I guess. And it also sounds like it'd be a lot of interdisciplinary work, and I'm wondering if other classes in mind, not like trading at time.
Well, it's funny, it's like college of humanities and social sciences, because our statistics department didn't like the math department. And so of course, they're grappling with this problem a lot, like in history and English. And there's a pretty big range. So I'm collaborating with folks in English to do all of this. That's where we got all these linguistic variables. They're trying to, for instance, deliberately use AI tools in courses. So for instance, there's a first-year writing requirement, and one of the options that can satisfy this is a course called Writing About Data, which is learning how to use data to make an argument and write a report. And they actually use some of this data as examples in that class and have students analyze it. And then they're trying different activities of having students use LLMs to do things and then reflect on it and so on. On the other hand, I just heard from a history professor at an event the college organized, who basically said, I teach like it's 1980. We use blue books, we're in the classroom. There's no like learning, no Canvas or Blackboard or whatever. They buy a book. And so there's different reactions.
I wonder how are the written to generate the reports that are written? Like, are they just plainly given tasks, or like, I also wonder if we just feed a few scientific papers into ChatGPT, what would their outputs be like?
So do you mean the reports like when I had it write a data analysis report?
I mean, like maybe a few Nature papers and then just feed them into.
So I have seen other research that looks at giving the LLM some examples and fine-tuning it, so adjusting the weights of the model. And those do seem to shift it back towards the right writing style, to matching the human writing. So it sort of undoes some of the instruction tuning. So if you gave it a bunch of examples, you may be able to get it to write more like that. One more?
No,
There's some assumption here that the consumer of the writing will be human.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's gonna be the case in the future. It's gonna be written and then read by.
So are you thinking of the model of I have ChatGPT write my email and you have ChatGPT summarize it? Possibly, but I don't yet know how to measure, like, did ChatGPT understand the writing that I gave it? Yes, so we will see.
There were still two hands up, I think Simon and Abel, maybe. I know we're at time, but maybe we still have time for those two questions.
I was just curious, like the distinction made in terms of writing for the sake of writing, offensive writing versus non-offensive writing, right? I was curious what you thought about, a lot of people write for leisure. For their own excitement for fun. I was wondering where that kind of fits in that framework and how GPT.
So that framework is meant for like how you use it in courses, how you use writing in courses. I think the writing as sort of for pleasure, I feel like this gets into the same thing that we see with art, for instance. Like, why do I make paintings if ChatGPT can, DALL-E or whatever can make a photorealistic, wacky painting? And I feel like that's something to definitely ask the actual humanities people in our college, because I don't really know sort of how that affects the motivation and things there.
I guess mine was a meta question. So will we just redefine what professional writing means 10, 20 years down the road?
I think unintentionally, yes, we'll see that shift. And I like one approach to do here, well, like what I'm doing with my PhD course is just say, fine, you're using this tool, so I'm just going to make my standards higher. Your writing has to look better because you have a thing that can make nice grammar and pretty introductions. So when I review and give you feedback, I'm just going to make you make it even better. And if you can do that and make a fantastic thing with the AI help, great, you did it. You've succeeded. But if you don't learn the concepts, you won't be able to figure out how to make it do the right things. And then, so when you have that ability to